Sorry about that. I let the whole intro play after all. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and for being here. It is Friday. It is a free energy Friday. That is the theme of our stream tonight. Real Science episode 29, because we did episode 30 last night. That's what happens when you pre-schedule things and then have some more free time. But anyways, we are joined tonight, Taryn Earthling, Sean, Simon C, Mike, Faraday Research, Jeremiah Pop, Exotic Propulsion, and Elimina. How is everybody?
10-4.
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much.
Hello and yo.
Hello. Oh, and we got Frankie joining us.
This is real. All ships check in.
Good to see Frankie right as we started. And we are still waiting for Andreas Sertis. Last we heard, he was on his way home from the grocery store and should be tuning in with us fairly soon. I wanted to start hours earlier tonight, but then I ended up getting called into work, the way it always happens. So it's still late as heck out east. So Mr. Mike at Faraday Research, we will let you take it away to start, good sir.
Yeah, just plugging away on one of my old projects. I decided to pull it out of the box again, so to speak. Working on the carbon magnesium graphite battery cells, and I got some pretty interesting results. As everybody knows, that I made two different types. One using the graphite rod, and then the other one I used using the tube with the carbon paint. And it turns out that the small cells seem to be lasting a lot longer as far as like deterioration of the magnesium. And the ones that I did with the carbon paint seem to be deteriorating a lot faster. So the ones that I made with the carbon graphite rods, I made those well over a year ago, and they're still in very, very good shape. And I fired those up again tonight, and they work just as good as the day I made them. So earlier in the week, I made a video, and I hooked them up to a capacitor bank with a diode on it, charged up the capacitor bank, and then hooked it up to my first generation Adams motor, and it actually ran it.
Audio is flat and tiny, lots of people are saying.
Could you move the microphone a little bit further from your mouth, Mike?
Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe Mike, if you could try and move it closer. Yeah, I guess it's coming in low for a lot of people.
Yeah, what's really weird is it sounded a lot better in pre-show, but now it sounds muffled, almost as if there's something blocking it.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Hey, yeah, there we go.
Oh, okay. Maybe I was blocking it. So, yeah, I did the test with the graphite batteries, charged up a small capacitor bank. It's only about 90 farad, not very much. But it had enough juice in it to run my first generation Adams motor. Ran it for about 5 minutes before it kind of kicked out on me. So I think I'm going to really pursue these batteries because they seem to be holding up as far as like longevity. Like I said, I made them over a year ago, and they still work just as good as the day I made them.
Yeah, that pure magnesium, that pure carbon rod is key. And like you talked about, there's very likely some pH imbalance part of that paint, that carbon paint that goes on there. And I'm guessing that it slowly eroded away at the magnesium head reaction.
Yeah, it eroded like extremely fast on the big ones. They look in a pretty rough shape considering I only made them a couple months ago.
Really?
So, yeah. So, but, these are the tests I have to do, right? Try different ideas, different methods, and then, observe what is happening, right? And, the small ones are just, like, lasting, like, really well. Like, the magnesium's not breaking down like the other one. And the power output's just as good as, like I said, the day I put them together.
And that's what you want for something that you're making as a backup or emergency cell as well. And free energy, do your own batteries. And this being Free Energy Friday, I'm very happy and synchronistic that you brought these back out today and are testing them, and sure enough, they're working still a year later just the same, and all you had to do was add water, correct?
Well, here's the kicker, though. I took them out of the box. They were bone dry, and I was still putting out about 1.2 volts with no water whatsoever on them. They were sitting in a cardboard box tucked away in a very, very dry spot.
That's just the relative humidity in the air.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Yeah. And the air is key too. For the reaction to happen, you have to have the magnesium with the water and the air. And the other cool thing I probably mentioned on earlier shows, when you activate them, the cells actually start to cool down. So that has to do, I guess, with the reaction.
The endothermic reactions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So they do cool down. So that's kind of interesting all in its own. Usually when you're creating something like a battery, you usually got heat, right?
Right, exactly. Break down the exothermic reaction as well as the resistance in our circuits.
Exactly. Because the second you get heat, the internal resistance of the battery increases, and that's the hysteresis and the breakdown, right? But these carbon batteries, they don't do that. They cool down. So
in the chat.
Mike, do you have a theory about how that works or why that is?
Oh, Frankie, do you mind also bringing your microphone closer up to yourself? You're very low, too. And repeat the question, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm using Buzz. I may have to mess with my settings. I was just asking if he has a theory on exactly why that happens. I'm going to work on my audio now for a second.
Yeah, now we can hear you better.
Yeah, it's kind of my take, but I think what's happening is naturally, because the water's on there, there is evaporation happening. And that evaporation causes a cooling effect because the air is running over.
Evaporation being an endothermic reaction right there. So
just basically the evaporation of the H2O, right?
Yeah, it could also be transfer of thermokinetic energy by the magnesium ion transport through that membrane. And if you think about it, like the magnesium ions that are most likely to jump off the magnesium surface and head towards the carbon rod are going to be the ones with the highest kinetic energy. And so those would be the hottest ones, basically. That might cause some cooling too. Yeah,
you would figure it would heat up because this kind of violates the law of thermodynamics, doesn't it?
Not really.
No.
No, you're exchanging a chemical bond for an electrical output.
Yeah. But you figure there would be
technically, it doesn't violate the law of thermodynamics, but you could say it's more than just a simple galvanic reaction, because here thermal energy from the outside making the magnesium warmer should technically provide more Brownian motion or thermionic motion at the surface, which would increase the output. And technically the magnesium would erode faster, but it would basically capture thermal energy in the process.
So here's a question for you, Jeremiah. My take on these batteries they're not batteries. It's actually a reactor, because technically a battery stores power, right? Because the reaction that's happening is exactly that. It's a reaction. So I don't know if that'd be fair to say that it's more kind of
I'd have to look up the limitations of our definitional battery. Let me go ahead and see.
Because a battery is the ability to add power to the cell and it would store it.
Because a battery, in the original context, a battery just means an assembly of smaller parts.
Right. No, but batteries are known to store power, right?
All right. Well, technically, it is a cell. Okay. So people call like AA's and AAA's and stuff batteries. A 9-volt is a battery because it actually contains 6 individual cells. But each of that AA and that AAA and that 18650, those aren't batteries. Those are cells.
Yeah.
They just contain one single.
But like the terminology that we use, that a battery, you could put electrical charge into the battery and it'll absorb it. With the graphite battery, you don't do that. It's creating a reaction only and release of energy.
Right. Well, here it's defining just an electrical power consisting of one or more electrochemical cells with external connections to powering electrical devices. And so technically, yeah, it does classify as under our generic kind of Wikipedia definition as being a battery because it is an electrochemical cell. It just isn't a conventional galvanic cell. It's still electrochemical. It's just not galvanic. So
Yeah, because what I'm kind of getting at that it's creating a reaction. There's a reaction involved of one or more elements.
It's the reaction or transport of magnesium ions, most likely through the membrane and being deposited into the carbon rod.
Yeah. So ultimately, what my plan is I'm going to build more of those small cells, and I want to create like how it would look like kind of like a reactor, right? Like a nuclear reactor kind of setup. And try to get maybe 20 or 30 of these hooked up in series. And then now I got a power plant. You know what I mean?
That would look pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm going to start the designs on that in Fusion. And then I'm going to build that reactor. And what I'm going to do is activate them. I'm going to use those ultrasonic vaporizers and have a little compartment. And every 12 hours, it'll give a shot of mist into the chamber and basically give the batteries a jolt, because I know usually, my tests show it'll last about 12 hours by the time, the moisture evaporates naturally. So every 12 hours, give it a shot, and those things will pretty much run indefinitely.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Why not just get the humidity high enough inside of like a bag or something? And
exactly, yeah. That's why I want to make it like in a reactor chamber to hold that moisture in, right?
Right, because it realistically shouldn't be going anywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, if I can build like a bank of it, 20 or 30 cells up in series, now I got some horsepower, and I was thinking of hooking that up directly to my Adams motor. And if I can do that, because I know my Adams motor takes very, very little current to run it. Basically, I just need potential. That it could actually run the Adams motor. And if I can get that to work, that will be its prime mover. It's these cells.
Yeah, that would be awesome to see how long you can actually run those things out on.
I think it will run pretty much indefinitely.
Keep them moist, and
We
as
want me to
long as
find
they
out.
don't break down, for sure.
Yeah,
Mike, can you?
That's a lot of magnesium to break down. It's a lot of magnesium ions that I got full, and that should last a pretty darn long time.
Yeah, I was shocked. I'm really shocked on how long they've lasted.
Mike, can you talk about the piezoelectric effect on these?
Well, they're not. That's in the Adams motor.
Is it too early for that?
Well, it's part of the other part of the system. It's creating. Well, from my oscilloscopes telling me that those the piezoelectric transducer I'm using in the Adams motor, it's running at about 31 kilohertz. So I'm hyper resonating that coil, I believe. Oh, Jeremiah, I did do some research on the original Adams motor, and apparently he was saying his power factor that he had on his motor was 0.
Okay. So, meaning that he requires no energy input.
Well, he says his motor was running at about 800% efficiency, and that was in 1977. So I don't know how accurate his measurements were. That can only be speculated.
When you start to bring in power factor and you're checking with certain types of equipment, it becomes incredibly difficult. Most equipment will not measure anything other than the power factor of a sine wave.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what kind of wave that was producing, but I thought it was a pulse switch, and that.
It's a pulse DC, right?
Yeah, so it's going to have some. It is likely going to have trouble with that if it was designed to measure AC line width or something like that.
See, that's the problem with these pulse motors, is because it's running using a special kind of pulse DC, and that's not easy to measure.
No, you have to filter it on the input and measure the full input before the filter, and then you have to correct it.
Yeah,
On the output to really get any good measurements on it.
Like I have no problems measuring the input voltage and current. It's what comes out on the other end. That's where it gets real difficult, right?
Yep, trying to transform that back into something that resembles a steady state DC is far more complicated.
Yeah, to say the least. But
is there a way to measure scalar waves?
Is there a way to measure scalar waves? Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So it's
you can do it with an oscilloscope.
Repeatable.
All you got to do to measure, if you're trying to talk about measuring a potential scalar wave or scalar wave voltage, then you just have to have an oscilloscope probe hooked up to some metal conductor that's large enough to pick up the E field. Because a scalar wave is just going to be a wave of electric field propagation that travels at a finite velocity. So
sure.
In that case, your probe will pick it up, and that's how I've detected pure potential scalar waves, the type of Tesla would generate. If you need to detect the direction, you need two individual detectors or two plates, basically, and then you look for the phase difference between the two based on their spacing, and you can calculate the velocity of light to see if it's faster or slower or equal.
I've actually done an experiment. I got two Tesla coils facing each other. Okay, so the scalar waves are basically colliding, and I put a fluorescent bulb in between the two while I was doing this, and I was finding a shadow was appearing in the middle of that bulb.
You'll get a dark spot because the potential between those 2 points is basically zero. They null out.
So where is it going?
It's going into counter space, in the words of Eric Dollard, or in a technical term, it's going into the stress energy momentum tensor of that region, stressing epsilon in the vacuum refractive index.
So would it be fair to say that, it would be actually going into another dimension? Or
it's not another dimension, it just simply changes the rate flow of time for the electric field propagation in that region.
Right. So would it be kind of similar?
I'd say it's almost folding into a hyperdimension.
How
like
about
that exists within higher dimensions, but like this?
No, you're actually correct about the term hyperdimension. That's exactly what's happening. You're putting a physical stress on the geometry of that space-time in such a way that it is compressed inward, so there is now more space-time in the canceled region than there would be outside of it. So if you try to pass an electric field through that, it'll travel slower through that compressed region tangentially, but along the linear path, it'll actually travel faster because that's the direction in which the polarization stress is taking place.
Now, would that be similar to, say, like the blotch wall in a coil, an inductor?
It's difficult to mix in the J-curl tensor because there you're talking about a twist in the fabric instead of a compression or an expansion. So one we can think of very much like what a balloon would do, or something. We can think of it sort of like an infinitely small point that just generates an outward pressure. But when we're talking magnetic, we're taking an already fixed region and we're just putting a physical twist on it.
Yeah. So when it rebounds off the blotch wall, it goes into a spin on the way out?
It could be an absorption through the physical materials in the electromagnet. It might be spinning up the nuclear magnetic moment, and that's where the energy is going, why there's such a sharp transient, because there's an inversion of the field flux.
See, before John Bandini passed away, he was experimenting with like using metal tubes as the core. Would there be an advantage there, regarding with the blotch wall and having the center of the core not there? Basically, like using like a metal tube.
I haven't seen that design. He might have been doing that purely to increase the speed of the impulse.
He did it. He used it with the zero force motor. He was using that, and it seemed to work really well.
I'd have to take a look at it to really analyze that.
Yeah,
I know with the Bandini 10 coiler that I've got sitting here, he used copper-coated iron rods. They're like kind of fence wire. They're like at least 99% or higher iron with a very thin copper plating on them.
Mine I'm using welding rods.
That also works extremely well.
Yeah, I find they do too. And when you take the magnetism away, when the coil shuts off, that magnetism seems to drop off real fast, which also is a benefit to my motor, because then you don't get the cogging effect and the attraction rate of the magnet with the core. seems to shut off, and then the magnet's able to freely pass it without any cogging.
I haven't done a huge amount of work with pulse motors, but I've seen the effect that you're talking about. It's almost as if it's reduced.
Now, I also found, too, very interesting, if I increase the distance between the magnet on the wheel and the coil, the output of the coil increases. When I put it closer to the wheel, the potential in the coil goes down. And
Closer, the potential goes down.
That could be a saturation issue in your core.
right. So I'm thinking, right now I got my coil set at about a half an inch away from the magnet on the wheel, and I seem to be getting the best performance.
Yeah, that would make sense. Your back EMF conversion is where you're going to avoid your cogging. So if you think about it, right, you have your magnet facing, let's say it's south outwards, and the point of the coil facing the magnet's incoming path is north, so they're attracting. As they attract in top dead center, when you suddenly disconnect current from that coil, all that back EMF comes flying out, and it's in the opposite direction. So if it's properly loaded, meaning current can flow through the coil, it'll produce a south pole on that magnet as it's flying past top dead center and actually push it away as you use the power that was accumulated in the
Yeah, because I know Bendini, when he set up his pulse motors, they were in attraction mode. Mine's in repulsion mode.
Why run it like that when you could actually get more out of it in attraction mode?
You get more out of it in the attraction mode?
Yeah, because what you want to do is consider that the back EMF is going to invert the magnetic poles on your core as you're using the power, but only if you use the power. So if you have, let's say it takes 1/4 of the rotation for the inductance to build up in your driving coil, in just a single coil example. At top dead center, when the magnet's over it and it's attracted to it, when you release that energy, if you just simply disconnect the wires, you're going to get a nice loud snap, and now you're going to get some cogging effect because the magnet's going to be attracted back towards the core.
Yeah.
If you put that power instead through a load where current can flow through the coil, as the magnetic flux from that core inverts, it'll invert much more slowly, continuously pushing the magnet away, since its poles are now like phased. And that's the key, is actually timing how you use your impulse.
Yeah, because I'm finding, I got my north facing out, and the core is in push configuration. It seems to be getting a lot better efficiency the way I have it set up.
I wonder if it's a timing thing too.
I think it is too, very much so. And I think also the spark gap switch is also a factor in this as well. I think there's something going on.
Definitely they are.
Yeah, the spark gap switch is the right kind of switch to use if you wanted the maximum impulse speed. But if you're not able to dump that impulse into something and completely use it up, especially if you have long wires going out to your load, it's just going to be dissipated right off as a radio wave out those wires and gone. And
I'm using a pretty heavy gauge wire coming off of, I think it's a 16 gauge speaker wire I'm using, and that goes directly into the transducer. So that high voltage impulse coming off the coil is going right into the transducer, and that's where I'm getting a huge snap.
Are you sure your transducer is not oversaturating though, to the point where you can't slow down the impulse?
How would I test something like that?
You would have to put voltage across the transducer, like a fixed voltage square wave, for example, and then you'd have a current probe that was just measuring how much current was flowing into the transducer. And you'd find at one point that the voltage would continue to rise, but no more current would go into the transducer because the element would have basically deformed as much as the lattice will allow, and at that point it can't deform anymore.
Yeah.
That's a very useful thing if you want a secondary impulse, because that secondary impulse transient will be very fast. That's what I was finding with the Rochelle crystals, is that the secondary impulse I get, which is specifically what I wanted them for, is extraordinarily quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm getting a huge amount of potential coming off that coil. The highest I recorded so far, peak to peak, was 0.765 kilowatt. So it was right up there.
Yeah, for that brief little time while it's on, it can definitely have a pretty high energy level. Of course, its average power is Just
Now, as far as current, because I'm getting such a snap off it, what would you think is happening on the current end?
I think you have extremely high current, and I think you have high voltage. People will say it's all high voltage and no current during that impulse. Absolutely
No,
not.
voltage is
It's
current.
high voltage and high current just for a brief period of time.
Yeah, because like Tesla's coils, apparently they were saying he was getting currents up to 2,500 amps.
Totally
that's
possible with an
massive.
extremely high Q factor. Think about what he
Yeah.
was putting into those things too. I mean, he was putting in, 200, 300, 500 kilowatts in some cases.
Yeah,
Just insane
exactly.
amounts of power.
He was making lightning bolts like 30 feet. So, that potential's there.
Oh yeah. But yeah, the difference is if you have a signal that's pure potential and it's basically zero current, it means that it can't actually flow except for through the capacitive field around the outside. So you can let that energy flow straight through your body, as I have done many times in demonstrations, and light up resistive loads, no problem, and you won't feel a thing.
Yeah, I've done
When
it.
you've got current behind it, and you already know when you're touching those wires on a back EMF impulse from the coil,
Oh, yeah, it
there's
doesn't feel
current
good.
there, all right, and it's going to neutralize through whatever the heck is connected to it, whatever its impedance. And if it's you, you're going to feel it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you'll fry a few brain cells in the process.
And you'll see a little white flash.
I remember hearing like in the 19th century, people were doing experiments with electricity and dentistry, and they thought that there was a lot of positive work that could be found, like experiments that were leading to positive places. But then they were destroying roots too. So some people were losing their teeth. And so it sort of just ended the idea of electrodentistry. But they found that there was ways of dealing with halitosis and everything else as well,
There's Benjamin. I should have kept it on your channel the whole
Could you
time.
tell us more?
What's up, buddy? I'm glad you're here.
Could you tell us more about electrodentistry?
Yeah, so
I gotta
what
head out.
were they?
I gotta head out for the night, but yeah, we'll talk soon. You're gonna be up early. I have an appointment in the morning, so
Have a good one, Mike. Thanks for presenting.
Yeah,
All
good
right,
luck.
Thank you, Mike. Absolutely, brother. Sorry for taking so long to get started. And I'm putting Mike's Faraday Research channel in the live chat for everybody to go subscribe.
I'll just throw a private link to electrodentistry in the private chat here from archive.org. But there's an old book on electrodentistry, facts and observations from 1874, which will it's really interesting. The kinds of things they thought electricity was, at this point, they're just starting to figure out what they believe about things. They're starting to invent the idea of vitamins and everything else. They're wondering if there's radio vitamin health, and all these things are starting to emerge because there's things that turned out to be not exactly true. And then we'll say, okay, they didn't know what they were talking about in the 19th century, but also weren't they right about a lot of things that we just don't understand today? And we go back and realize that there really is the truth to it, even if the words have changed,
Let's just say they were entirely right when they figured out that irradiating was a good way of removing hair. It's just there are side effects to that.
Yeah, isn't there that's the thing too, like they make those things that like shock your face and they help get rid of acne or anything, but a lot of acne has to do with chemicals, toxins you're trying to naturally release. This is something a lot of people just push it out of their systems, right? To their back.
The thing. It's really kind of insidious because at first you might actually see a minor improvement and then you get skin cancer all over your face, which is what happened back in the day. So you really got to be careful with this kind of stuff.
Matt Powers talks about this with his wife, and Matt Powers, his wife, but then she would turn around and put negative ions into it and would do that in a fluctuation back and forth. And she had been having real problems with cancer, and doing that in a back and forth like that, she actually killed all the cancer in her mouth, and they had to stop all of her other treatments.
Wow.
But he had to oscillate it with the negative side, not just the positive.
I'm pretty convinced that certain kinds of mouth and foot funguses are responsible for so much of the problems that people are experiencing. Heart debilitation. I mean, obviously not medical advice or anything like that. This is just personal opinions, but the ideas actually have been shown that to have some scientific evidence that people will have sleep apnea from perhaps foot fungus or from halitosis. They might be connected concepts, and it could have heart defibrillation. It's called defibrillation, heart defibrillation. That's related sometimes. So a lot, and then diabetes is coming from sleep apnea, and some sleep apnea is coming from fungus. So these things are things people should be looking out for a lot more.
If you look in the mirror and your tongue is white, that is not supposed to be the case. FYI, go see a doctor.
Yeah, and I don't know. What do you think about like tongue scrapers?
I think that is not really conducive. Just change your diet so that it's not something that, Candida is going to just thrive on. It's a lot easier than, trying to put a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah.
I would say it's part of the maintenance regime, not a silver bullet.
Can I ask you guys all a question?
Yeah, for sure.
This is for BurnEye, probably most of all. Okay, so have you guys heard of hydroelectric magneto drives? Like where you put salt water inside of a
Yeah, you're talking about MHD, magnetohydrodynamics.
It technically
It
works
has
with
electric current across
any
a
fluid,
fluid
yeah.
medium through a magnetic flux.
Sure.
And the curvature of the path of the electric charges flowing creates a Lorentz force on those charges and pushes the water
Sure.
along, or whatever
And
the
it
fluid is.
So what I made is this. There's a copper big wire, like 3 millimeters inside, and I've basically put magnets here, so